My daughter-in-law accidentally sent me a recording that was actually for her brother, and what I heard about my son left me frozen. The next morning, I put together a plan she would never see coming. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of vengeance from. I want to know how far it has traveled. I was in the kitchen, busy arranging the spice jars on the old wooden shelf. The radio was playing with some static, the news anchor saying something about prices at the market, but I wasn't paying much attention. My mind was on dinner, calculating what I could make for David, my son who always came home exhausted after a long day at work. Just then, my phone vibrated, in the pocket of my apron. I quickly dried my hands and took out the old smartphone David had bought me a few years ago. The screen lit up with a notification from WhatsApp. It was from Chloe, my daughter-in-law. I frowned, a little surprised. She hardly ever sent voice messages, especially since we all lived under the same roof. If she wanted to say something, she just had to open her mouth. Chloe had been out since the morning, saying she was going to see some friends. I thought maybe she wanted to ask me to do something, like buy more vegetables or milk. So I tapped to listen. But in my clumsiness, while holding a salt shaker, I accidentally hit the button to save the audio to my phone. Before I could understand what was happening, I opened WhatsApp again and saw that the message was gone. Chloe texted immediately. "Sent that by mistake. Did you hear it, Mom?" I thought for a moment and replied, "No, dear." She just responded with a thumbs up emoji and said nothing more. I sat down in the wooden chair by the kitchen table, still holding the salt shaker. Suddenly, I remembered something David had once told me. "Mom, Chloe isn't one to send voice messages. If she does, it's definitely something very important." That sentence sparked my curiosity. I opened the list of audio files on my phone and with trembling fingers selected the recording I had just saved. Chloe's voice played, but it wasn't the sweet voice she used with me. It was one full of annoyance, as if she were venting. She addressed the other person as bro, and I knew immediately it was Julian, her older brother. Then she started talking about David. "This David is so boring, so useless. He never earns enough for me to live the way I deserve." I felt my heart clench. I tried to keep listening, but every word was like a stab. She said she couldn't stand life with a man as mediocre as David anymore, that she wanted a divorce right now. I was frozen, clutching the phone. Chloe continued, her voice lower, as if sharing a secret. She said she was wasting her time with David, that she dreamed of being the wife of a rich and successful man, the same one Julian had promised to introduce her to. Then her tone lightened, accompanied by a little laugh, as if she'd thought of something funny. "If David loses his standing at the company, everything will be easier. Thanks for giving me ideas on how to make him look bad at work. That way, I'll have the perfect excuse to ask for a divorce." I was in shock. My heart was beating so hard, it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I almost dropped the phone on the kitchen floor. Trembling, I played the recording again. Every word dug into my soul. There was no mistake. It was the voice of Chloe, my daughter-in-law, the woman I had come to love like a daughter. She was conspiring against my son, the boy I had dedicated my entire life to loving and protecting. I felt a lump in my throat, as if something were keeping me from breathing. At that very moment, the iron grate creaked. "Mom, I'm home!" David's voice rang out, clear and full of life as always. I panicked, quickly shoved the phone into my pocket, and took a deep breath to calm myself. I went out to the patio and saw David standing there, a huge smile on his sun-kissed face. He held up a bag of pastries from the corner bakery, the same one where I used to buy his birthday cake when he was a boy. "Have you had dinner yet, Mom? I brought you these pastries, the kind you like, right?" he asked in his warm voice. I forced a smile. I took the bag and tried to keep my voice from shaking. "Yes, I'm just making dinner now. Go take a shower. You must be tired." David nodded and went into the house, whistling a cheerful tune. Watching him walk away, I felt my heart break in two. How could he be smiling like that when the wife he loved so much was planning to destroy his life? A little while later, Chloe arrived. She walked in wearing a blue dress that shimmered under the kitchen light, her hair styled in curls. She saw me chopping vegetables, gave me a quick glance, and said dryly, "I already ate out, Mom. You two go ahead." She went straight to her room without another word. I nodded, but inside a storm was raging. Her look, the way she walked so calmly, as if nothing were wrong, filled me with rage and helplessness. That night, after David had gone to bed, I sat in silence in the small kitchen under the dim yellow light that illuminated the cracks in the wall. The ticking of the wall clock was constant, but my mind was in chaos. I couldn't sleep a wink. I looked out the window.
The sky was ink black with just a few stars peeking through the thick clouds. Chloe's recording kept playing in my head. Each phrase was like a needle piercing my heart. I wondered how someone who had called me mom could say such cruel things about my son. How could she plan to ruin the life of David, the boy I had protected with my entire being? I got up, I walked slowly to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of cold water. My hand was shaking so much that a little water spilled onto the tile floor. I sat down again, trying to breathe deeply, but the lump in my throat wouldn't go away. Outside, on the patio, the night wind seeped through the cracks in the door, bringing a chill that made me shiver. I knew then that a storm was coming, not just inside me, but for the entire family. Memories of the past began to surface, as clear as if they had happened yesterday. I remembered the difficult years when my husband died suddenly from a heart attack. David was just 12 years old, too young to understand the pain of losing his father. I, a 30-year-old woman with little education, had to manage on my own to raise my son. I would get up at 4 in the morning to work catering jobs, standing over a hot stove. The smell of cooking food would mix with the smoke that made my eyes water. I would wrap each dish with care and deliver them across town, no matter if the sun was scorching or if it was pouring rain. In the afternoons, I did laundry and ironing for the wealthy families in the neighborhood, and my hands grew rough from being in soapy water all the time. At night, I worked the late shift at the corner store, counting every dollar to save for David's school. There were nights when exhaustion almost defeated me, but seeing David studying under the light of a single lamp gave me the strength to go on. I'll never forget the day he received his university degree. I wore the only dress I owned without any patches and sat in a corner of the auditorium watching my son walk across the stage. When he turned to look at me with a radiant smile, I cried like a child. Those tears weren't just of joy, but of relief. After so many years of sacrifice, I thought all my effort had been worth it. Then came the day David introduced me to Chloe. She came into the house with her long, shiny hair, a charming smile, and a box of gourmet cookies in her hand. "Mom, this is Chloe," David said, his voice full of pride. I looked at the young woman in front of me. She seemed polite and attentive. Chloe used to help me set the table. Sometimes she would peel fruit or wash the dishes, and she always called me Mom with a sweetness that melted my heart. Once she gave me a blue scarf, saying it suited me. I was so touched. I thought my son had found a good partner, someone with whom he would build a happy family. Their wedding was simple, but very warm. The whole neighborhood came to congratulate them, and laughter filled the backyard. I watched David and Chloe exchange rings, my heart full of hope. I thought I could finally be at peace because my son now had his own home. But just a few years later, everything began to change. Chloe was no longer the sweet girl I had met. She started spending money lavishly, constantly asking for designer clothes and expensive handbags. Whenever David refused, telling her they needed to save for the future, Chloe would get moody. Sometimes she would yell at him in front of me, her voice icy. "You're always thinking about saving. What's the point of living like that?" I remember one night, David had just gotten paid, and before he could pay the rent, Chloe was already asking for a Gucci bag. It cost what my son earned in an entire month. David shook his head and explained calmly, "Honey, we have other more important things. Can we wait until next month?" Chloe said nothing, just shot him a furious look and threw the bag of groceries David had just bought onto the floor. The container broke, and the smell of food spread everywhere. She turned and left, leaving David sitting in silence, picking up the pieces from the floor. His face was pale, his eyes empty. I was in a corner of the kitchen, wanting to run and hug him, but my feet seemed glued to the floor. I could only turn away and pretend to be cleaning to hide my tears. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that today's recording wasn't a surprise. It was just the tip of the iceberg that, in my naivety, I hadn't seen before. The times Chloe got angry, the times she complained about David, they were all signs. I blame myself. How could I have let my son live with someone like this without realizing it? I trusted too much. I had too much faith in a home I believed was perfect. I got up and went out to the patio. The night wind was blowing stronger, carrying the scent of damp earth from the small garden. I hugged myself, feeling as though my world was collapsing. I went back to the kitchen. I poured another glass of water, but this time I didn't drink. I just stood there, staring into the darkness outside the window, my heart in a knot. The next morning, I woke up early, as always, but with no peace in my soul. The kitchen was the same as every day. The smell of coffee filled the air, but I felt as if everything was covered in a thick fog. I tried to stay calm and made breakfast as usual: toast, fried eggs, and a plate of chopped fruit. David sat at the table reading the newspaper, and Chloe came down a little later, her hair in a ponytail and wearing a crisp white blouse. She poured the coffee, set it on the table, and turned to me with a little smile. "Mom, would you like more sugar?" I looked her straight in the eye, searching for a trace of sincerity, but all I saw was an icy falsehood. Her eyes scanned me as if she were calculating something. I nodded slightly and said in the low voice, "It's fine like this, dear." Inside, the rage was still burning, but I knew I had to hold it in. If I showed my emotions now, everything could fall apart before I could do anything to protect David. David looked up from the newspaper, excited. "Mom, I have a very important meeting at the office today. If they approve this report, they might consider me for a promotion." He smiled and his eyes shone with hope. I smiled back, but my gaze unintentionally shifted to Chloe. She frowned for a split second, so fast that if I hadn't been paying attention, I would have missed it. Then she put on a crooked smile, as if hiding something. "Really, honey, that's great," she said in a syrupy voice, but I felt the lie in every syllable. Breakfast passed in silence. The only sound was the clinking of cutlery against the plates. After David kissed my forehead and rushed off to work, Chloe stayed behind to clear the table. But I knew it was just an excuse. As soon as I turned my back to wash the dishes, I heard her pick up the phone and speak in a low voice, as if afraid someone might hear. I stood still, pretending to clean the stove, but my ears were wide open. "You leave it to me," Chloe whispered. "David definitely won't turn in the report on time. I've already taken care of it." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't hear clearly what was said on the other end, but I assumed it was Julian, her brother. Another trap, another attempt to make my son fail. At noon, I went to the market with Sharon, my neighbor and best friend. Under the intense sun, we walked among the stalls full of vegetables with the bustle of people in the background. But my heart was heavy. I couldn't focus on choosing cilantro or meat. Finally, I pulled Sharon to a quiet corner near the fishmonger. "Sharon, I have to tell you something.
I began, my voice trembling. I told her about the voice message. Everything Chloe had said about David and her plan to sabotage him. Sharon's eyes went wide and she put a hand on my shoulder. Oh, Margaret, how could she? You have to do something. Don't let that woman keep hurting David. I nodded, but inside I was a mess. I know, Sharon, but I have to be smart. If I act rashly, I'm afraid it will only make things worse for David. Sharon squeezed my shoulder firmly. The truth always comes out, Margaret. You just watch. Gather evidence. I'll be here for whatever you need. Her words gave me strength, but I still felt a vague fear. I was afraid for David and also for myself, for not having the courage to face the truth. When I got home, I had barely opened the gate when I heard David shouting from inside, "Mom, I'm so glad you're here!" His voice sounded desperate, not like usual. I went inside and saw him rummaging through a pile of papers on the table, his face pale. "Mom, I can't find the documents for the afternoon meeting. I left them in my briefcase this morning and now they're gone." I looked around and saw Chloe in a corner, her arms crossed with a look of fake surprise. "But I left them on the table. Honey, didn't they fall out at the office?" she said, as if she had nothing to do with it. I watched in silence and my eyes landed on the sofa. A stack of papers was sticking out from a crack in the cushion, as if someone had hidden it on purpose. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice calm as I bent down to pick them up. "David, could these be them?" I handed them to him, glancing sideways at Chloe. He let out a sigh of relief and hugged me. "Thanks, Mom. Yes, these are them. I have to get back to the office now." Chloe shot me a fleeting look, a flash of annoyance in her eyes, but she quickly turned away, pretending to be busy on her phone. I stood there watching David rush out, feeling both relieved and hurt.
Relieved because my son had found his documents, but hurt because I knew that if I hadn't seen them, David would have failed at his meeting. And the person behind it all was Chloe. I wondered how far she had gone with her plan. How many more times would she try to ruin my son? That night, when everyone was supposedly asleep, I heard whispers from the living room again. I tiptoed down the stairs and hid behind the thick curtain, my heart in my throat. Chloe's voice was low but sharp. "Yeah, bro, it almost worked today. I hid the papers, but that old woman found them. I have to be more careful." I clutched the edge of my blouse, trying to control my breathing so I wouldn't make a sound. Her words were another stab, confirming all my suspicions. Chloe wasn't just bad-mouthing David, she was actively working to make him fail. I went back to my room in silence and laid down, but my eyes burned. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I knew tears wouldn't solve anything. In my head, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The audio, Chloe's fake look, the hidden papers, and the secret call, it all pointed to one truth. Chloe was no longer the daughter-in-law I had trusted. She was a danger to David, to this family. I couldn't keep this secret to myself any longer. The weight of the recording of Chloe's actions was like a rock on my chest that wouldn't let me breathe. I had to do something, find someone to talk to, not to vent, but to find the right path for David. I picked up the phone, and with trembling fingers, I dialed the number of Mr. and Mrs. Miller, Chloe's parents. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked them to meet me at a small coffee shop near the house the next morning. "We need to talk," I said, without giving details. Mr. Miller responded in his deep voice. "All right, Mrs. Thompson, we'll be there." That morning, the day dawned cold with the light drizzle. As if the sky were as heavy as my heart. I put on an old gray sweater and the scarf David had given me years ago. In front of the mirror, I saw my face. The deep-set wrinkles, the tired eyes, but with the glint of determination. I didn't want this meeting to turn into a fight, but I needed the truth to come out, and I hoped Chloe's parents would understand. The coffee shop was tucked away in an alley with closely packed wooden tables and a delicious smell of roasted coffee in the air. I arrived early and chose a table near the window. I sat down, clutching my glass of water, trying to gather my thoughts. When Mr. and Mrs. Miller walked in, I immediately recognized his tall, graying figure, and Mrs. Miller behind him with an old cloth bag and a worried expression. They looked at me with inquisitive eyes, as if they already guessed part of the story. I stood up, offered a forced smile, and invited them to sit. "Thank you for coming," I said in a low voice. "Can I get you some coffee?" They nodded, and I ordered 3 black coffees, no sugar. When the waitress brought the coffees, I took a deep breath and took out my phone. "I want you to listen to something," I said, my voice calm, but my heart racing. I played the recording. Chloe's voice filled the quiet space, sharp as a knife. "This David is so boring, so useless. He never earns enough for me to live the way I deserve," she said with obvious contempt. Then she continued, talking about the divorce, the rich man Julian would introduce her to, and how they were trying to make David fail. I watched Mr. and Mrs. Miller. She turned pale, covered her mouth with her hand, and her eyes widened in horror. "My God, it can't be. Did my daughter and son really say that?" she whispered, her voice about to break. Mr. Miller gently tapped the table. "From Julian, I expected?"
He's always been a social climber. But Chloe? How could she talk about her husband like that? I remained silent, leaving the phone on the table so they could process what they had just heard. Then I told them everything slowly. How Chloe sent the message by mistake, how she deleted it immediately, and how by sheer luck, I had saved it. I didn't want to believe it, I told them, looking at them intently. I loved Chloe like a daughter. But what she said, what she's doing, I can't let her keep hurting my son. Mr. Miller sat up straight, his face turning from pale to red with anger. He clenched his fists, holding back his rage. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice deep but firm, "we are incredibly ashamed. Davy is a good man, a hard worker who loves our daughter, and for Chloe to behave like this, I have no words to apologize." Mrs. Miller, her eyes filled with tears, took my hand. Hers was cold and trembling. Forgive us for David," she said between sobs. "It was our fault for not raising our children right. We never imagined Chloe was capable of something like this." I nodded, feeling a weight in my soul. A part of me felt sorry for them, parents facing such a painful truth about their children, but another, larger part felt a fire burning inside. I didn't want this to end with a simple confession. "It's time for everything to come out," I said, with more firmness than I expected. "I don't want David to continue living a lie, but I need your help. Chloe and Julian have to face the consequences of their actions." Mr. Miller looked at me with determination, but also pain in his eyes. "You're right," he said. "We won't cover for them. But Mrs. Thompson, what are you planning to do?" I shook my head, not answering immediately. A plan was beginning to form in my mind, but I wasn't ready to reveal it. "I'll find a way," I replied in a low but confident voice. "I just needed you to know the truth and, if necessary, to be on David's side." Mrs. Miller wiped her tears and nodded. "Don't you worry about that," she said. "We'll do whatever it takes to make this right. We just hope David can forgive us." I gave her a bitter smile, not of joy, but because I knew this was just the first step. The battle wasn't over, and I needed more than an apology. Leaving the coffee shop, the drizzle was still falling. I clutched my scarf and walked slowly along the wet sidewalk, the smell of damp earth mixed with the scent of coffee that had clung to my clothes. I felt sorry for Mr. and Mrs. Miller, but also a fierce determination. I thought of David, of his smile when he arrived with the pastries, of the dreams he had for his future. I couldn't let Chloe take everything from him. I knew I still had a lot to do. Gather more evidence, find a way to confront Chloe, and most importantly, protect my son from deeper wounds.
After the meeting with Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I knew I couldn't stop there. My word alone against Chloe's wouldn't be enough. I needed someone with more authority, someone who could make her actions have immediate consequences. I thought of Catherine Reed, Chloe's direct boss at the communications agency. If anyone could set things straight, it was her. The next morning, I sat alone in the living room. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, drawing faint stripes on the floor. I picked up my phone and listened to the recording again. Chloe's voice came through, sharp and dismissive. David is useless. I need a man who's worth it. Every time I heard it, I felt my heart clench, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let my emotions take over. I turned on David's old computer, the one he had left for me to use if I needed to look something up. I went to Chloe's company website and searched for contact information. In a few minutes, I found Catherine Reed's email address. I sat in front of the screen, my fingers poised over the keyboard, and composed a brief email. "Dear Miss Reed," I wrote, "my name is Margaret. I am the mother of David, the husband of your employee, Chloe Miller. I am writing to share a truth about her. I apologize for the intrusion, but it is a matter of ethics. I am attaching a recording I received by accident." I attached the audio file. I checked every word, every period. I didn't want the email to sound angry or resentful. I just wanted the truth to be known. When I hit send, I felt my heart pound, as if I had just thrown a stone into a calm lake. Barely 20 minutes later, my phone rang. An unknown number. I took a deep breath and answered. "Am I speaking with Margaret?" A voice on the other end said, serious and clear, but not cold. "This is Catherine Reed, the director of the company where Chloe works." I clutched the phone, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Yes, this is she," I replied. Miss Reed was direct. "I've already listened to the recording you sent. Could you tell me more about this?" I told her everything, briefly but precisely, the message sent by mistake, Chloe's words on the recording, and how she had tried to hide David's documents to make him fail. I didn't exaggerate anything, just stated what I had seen and heard. Ms. Reed was silent for a moment, then said, "I've suspected Chloe for some time. She has engaged in several non-transparent behaviors. Late deliveries, lies about her project progress, but what you have given me is conclusive proof. Thank you for speaking up. I will take care of this immediately." Her voice was firm, but I detected a hint of sadness, as if she too was disappointed in Chloe. I hung up and sat there feeling like a weight had been lifted, but I was still uneasy inside. I thought of David, of his carefree smile whenever he came home. How was I going to tell him that the wife he loved was conspiring to ruin his life? How could I protect him without causing him more pain? That afternoon, David came home earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner when I heard the gate open. He walked in with a somber face and slumped shoulders. He collapsed into a chair and put his head in his hands. "Mom," he said in a muffled voice, "Chloe called me today. She said she was called into the director's office. She doesn't know what happened, but she was crying a lot. I'm worried." I stopped chopping, the knife frozen in midair. I turned to look at my son and saw his eyes were red, as if he were holding back tears. I feigned a sigh, put down the knife, and went to him. "I'm sure it's just something at work, dear," I said gently. "Don't worry too much. Everything will be all right." But inside, a mix of emotions washed over me. I knew the first blow had landed on Chloe. Miss Reed had acted, and I felt a bit of relief. But at the same time, it hurt to see David worried about a wife who didn't deserve it. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything, but I knew it wasn't the time yet.
That night, as I was knitting in the living room, a habit I had to calm my nerves, my phone lit up. A text message from Catherine Reed's number. Chloe Miller has been terminated. Her actions are not compatible with the professional ethics of this company. I thank you again for your honesty. I read the message over and over, feeling as if a huge rock had been lifted from my chest. I put the phone down, set it on the table, and let out a long sigh. One step of my plan was complete. The dim yellow light illuminated the cracked walls. Catherine Reed's message was still glowing on the phone screen, but I didn't feel any satisfaction. The firing was just the first step, a small piece in the long road I had to travel to protect David. I knew that if I wanted my son to escape the web of lies Chloe had woven, I had to bring the truth to light completely right before his eyes. But how could I do that without breaking his heart? That question drilled into my head like a cold wind. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Sharon, my faithful neighbor who had been with me through thick and thin. When she answered, I told her Chloe had been fired. My voice was a whisper, as if I were afraid someone might hear, even though the house was completely silent. Sharon let out a bitter laugh. Everyone gets what they deserve, Margaret. She thought she was so clever, but in the end, she had to pay. She paused and added seriously, "But be careful. Chloe isn't one to give up easily. She'll find a way to get revenge, I'm sure of it." Her words were a warning that made me shiver. I asked her to keep it a secret, but I also said, "Sharon, if the time comes when I need you to be my witness, will you help me?" She answered without hesitation, "Margaret, you know I'm always here for you. Call me whenever." That night, after David was asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table with an old notebook and a pen. I started to write everything down, every date, every small detail I had witnessed. The day I received the recording, the day I saw Chloe hide David's documents under the sofa, the day I met with her parents, and the day I sent the email to Miss Reed. I wrote carefully, my handwriting trembling on the paper. Every memory was like a wound, but I forced myself to be strong. I took a large envelope, put my notes inside, and a copy of the recording that I had transferred to a USB drive. I put it all in the drawer in my bedroom and locked it. That small lock was like a promise to myself. I would not let anyone take this truth from me. The next morning, I called Mr. and Mrs. Miller again. I didn't want to wait any longer. When Mr. Miller answered, I got straight to the point. "We need an occasion to confront Chloe and Julian face to face. David has to hear the truth or he'll continue to live deceived." There was a silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard Mr. Miller sigh. "Mrs. Thompson," he said with a sad voice, "we agree. Our daughter was wrong and she has to take responsibility. We just hope that David can forgive us one day." Mrs. Miller chimed in, her voice choked. "We'll do whatever is necessary, ma'am. I just ask that you don't blame us too much." I nodded, though they couldn't see me, and replied, "I don't blame you, but David deserves to know the truth." I decided that the perfect occasion would be the upcoming family party, a gathering I had been planning for a while to celebrate David's birthday. Everyone would be there: David, Chloe, Julian, and their parents. It would be the ideal moment for everything to come to light. I knew that if I let this opportunity pass, Chloe would continue her game and David would keep living in the illusion of a happy marriage. That day, I tried to make everything seem normal. Chloe didn't seem to have any idea that I had sent the recording to her boss. She got ready for the party with complete naturality, laughing with David about the new dress she would wear to impress the family. "What do you think of this dress?" she asked David, showing off a bright red dress, her eyes sparkling as if she were acting in a play. David smiled and nodded. "You look beautiful, honey. You're going to knock everyone's socks off with that." I, from a corner of the kitchen, watched the scene with a heavy heart. Chloe's phoniness made me sick, but I just nodded, hiding a cold smile. Let her keep acting, I told myself. In a few days, it would all be over. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the table, the dim light illuminating my face in a small mirror. I checked my phone, making sure the recording was still there, the battery full. I opened the file, listened to Chloe's voice again, and every word reminded me of my mission. I murmured as if speaking to myself. Tomorrow, everything will be clear. Tomorrow, David will see the true face of the woman he trusted so much. The day of the family party, I woke up when the sky was still dark, before the first rays of sun appeared. My small kitchen filled with the aroma of lasagna, David's favorite dish since he was a boy. I stood by the stove, stirring the thick sauce, my hands nimble, but my heart heavy. Today wasn't just David's birthday. It was the day he had to face the truth, the day everything would come out. I also made a salad, tossing each ingredient with care, the same way I had wrapped my love for my son for so many years. But today, this food wasn't just food. It was part of the play I had to stage to make everything seem normal. David got up early and started decorating the living room. He hung some yellow paper garlands from the ceiling, whistling a cheerful tune. "Mom, how does it look?" he asked, turning to me with a radiant smile. I nodded, forcing a smile, but I felt as if someone were squeezing my heart. Seeing my son preparing his party with such innocence made me want to run and hug him, to tell him that everything was about to change, that I wouldn't let him get hurt. But I couldn't. It wasn't time yet. Chloe appeared later, coming down the stairs in her bright red dress and perfectly curled hair. She stood in front of the living room mirror, fixing her hair with a satisfied smile as if nothing had happened. "How do I look, Mom?" she asked, her voice sweet but fake. I looked at her. My eyes scanned her flashy dress, and I just nodded. "Very beautiful, dear." But inside, I felt a deep disgust. Chloe's phoniness was a fragile mask, and I knew I would rip it off today. In the afternoon, the guests began to arrive. Mr. and Mrs. Miller came in with tense faces and sat together in a corner as if seeking comfort in each other. Sharon arrived with the bottle of wine as a gift, with a kind smile, but her eyes met mine as if to say, "I'm here, don't worry." Julian was the last to arrive, with the bottle of tequila in his hand and a loud laugh. "Today we have to celebrate big. It's my brother-in-law's birthday." I looked at him and saw the same fake smile as Chloe. I knew they were both acting, but I also knew the show was about to end. The dinner began in a tense atmosphere. Everyone made a toast, and the sound of clinking glasses sounded hollow. I watched in silence, seeing how Mr. Miller squeezed his wife's hand over and over, his eyes full of anguish. Mrs. Miller barely spoke, just stared at her plate. Chloe, on the other hand, wouldn't stop looking around, showing off her red dress and laughing loudly as if she wanted to drown out the tension. David, sitting beside her, remained oblivious to it all, telling stories about his work, about the successful meeting the other day. Every word he said broke my heart. He didn't know that the wife sitting next to him was conspiring to destroy everything. Halfway through dinner, while everyone was eating the lasagna, I stood up. My heart was pounding, but I tried to keep my voice firm. "Before we continue," I said, my gaze sweeping over each person in the room, "I have something I want everyone to hear." The room fell into a deathly silence. I took the phone out of my pocket and with a trembling hand played the recording. Chloe's voice echoed clear and cutting. "David is useless. I can't stand him anymore. You have to help me, bro. I need a man who's worth it." Then Julian's voice was heard, slick and full of malice. "Don't worry, I have a rich, successful friend. And as for David, he just needs to fail a couple more times, and I'll replace him at the company myself." The air in the room seemed to freeze. All eyes were fixed on me, and then turned to Chloe. David went pale. His fork fell from his hand and clattered on the table. He stared at Chloe, his eyes red, unable to believe what he was hearing. Chloe jumped up, her face drained of all color. "This is a setup," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You edited my voice. How dare you do something like that?" But before I could answer, Mr. Miller slammed his hand on the table, his voice trembling with rage. "Be quiet, Chloe. That's your voice. That's your plan with Julian. Do you think we're stupid?" Mrs. Miller burst into tears, covering her face. "My God, you've shamed us, Chloe. How could you treat David like this?" Julian stood up, frozen, his gaze lost, clutching the tequila bottle on the table. He couldn't say anything. He just hung his head. I looked at David. He was still sitting, motionless, with an empty look. Then he whispered, his voice broken. "All these years, was it all a lie?" I went to my son and squeezed his hand. It was cold and trembling, as if his whole world had collapsed. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I knew those words meant nothing in that moment. I just held his hand, hoping my strength could keep him from falling apart. "Son," I said in a low voice, a lump in my throat. "I'm here. I will always be here." Chloe didn't apologize. Instead of bowing her head, she lifted it defiantly. "Yes, I want a divorce. I don't need a useless husband like you. I have better opportunities." Her words were like knives, not just for David, but for me too. Julian stood up, nodding coldly. "Let's go, Chloe. We have nothing to do here." He took his sister by the arm and pulled her out of the house. Chloe tossed her hair back and walked out arrogantly, as if she were the victor. The clicking of her heels echoed on the wooden floor, and the door slammed shut, shaking the whole house. I stood there, feeling my heart tremble with that sound. David was still sitting, saying nothing, his gaze lost in the void. I approached and put a hand on his shoulder, but my hand was shaking. "David," I called softly, but he didn't respond. Then, as if it took all his strength, he whispered, "If you've already decided, then go." He agreed to the divorce. His voice was barely a murmur, but it was firm, as if he had just let go of a huge part of his life. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I knew no words could heal that wound. In that moment, Mr. Miller approached. His tall figure now seemed stooped and tired. He placed a hand on David's shoulder and said in a deep but sincere voice, "Son, believe me, this is not your fault. My children are the ones who have caused this shame. I ask for your forgiveness from the bottom of my heart." Mrs. Miller was sobbing uncontrollably. She took my hand and said through her tears, "Mrs. Thompson, forgive us. My daughter did a terrible thing, but we will not cover for her. We are so ashamed for not raising our children right." I looked at her and saw the pain in her eyes. I understood that they were suffering too, shattered by the truth. Sharon, my neighbor, stood up silently, poured a glass of water, and placed it in David's hand. "Son, drink this," she whispered with a mother's tenderness. "You need to calm down. Everything will be okay." David took the glass, but his hand trembled so much that the water spilled. He didn't drink, just stared at the glass, as if looking for an answer in it. I sat next to him and hugged him. I felt his body shake like a lost child. I stroked his back, trying to transfer my strength to him. "You're not a fool, David," I said with my voice emotion. "You just loved for real, and that is never a mistake." He didn't respond. He just whispered almost inaudibly, "All these years, was it all a lie?" I went to my son and squeezed his hand. It was cold and trembling, as if his whole world had collapsed. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I knew those words meant nothing in that moment. I just held his hand, hoping my strength could keep him from falling apart. "Son," I said in a low voice, a lump in my throat, "I'm here. I will always be here." Outside, a dog's bark could be heard in the distance, mixed with the whistling of the wind. Darkness enveloped the house, but within me, a new chapter had just begun. I knew the real storm was just beginning. Chloe and Julian were gone, but the wounds they left would not heal easily. After the night Chloe and Julian left, the house felt strangely empty, as if all the joy had vanished. The walls that once echoed with David's laughter, with his carefree whistling, now held only a heavy silence. David was no longer my radiant son. He would go to work in the morning and return at night, quiet, withdrawn, his eyes sunken as if he were carrying the weight of the world. I would look at him and feel my heart twist. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I knew those words meant nothing to him in that moment. He had lost the woman he loved, the one he trusted, and I, despite having done everything to protect him, felt helpless in the face of his pain. To cheer David up a bit, I asked Sharon to visit often. She, with her cheerful personality and her market gossip, always managed to make the atmosphere less dense. One morning, Sharon and I went to the downtown market together, as was our custom. The smell of fresh vegetables, the bustle of people, and the sun filtering through the stall roofs used to lift my spirits. But that day, my mind was still stuck on thoughts of David. I was picking out a bunch of cilantro when Sharon gently pulled my arm and whispered, "Marguerite, have you heard? They're talking about Chloe over there." I looked up, curious. Sharon pointed to a vegetable stand on the other side where a few women were whispering. I walked over, pretending to choose tomatoes, but my ears were wide open. One of the vendors, a woman with her hair in a bun, said as she peeled potatoes that Chloe is out of a job and keeps moving from place to place. She moves every month. They say she left all her stuff, that she's only carrying a couple of suitcases. The poor thing is couch surfing. Another woman, arranging carrots, added, "Yeah, and the rich guy her brother introduced her to turned out to already have a wife and kids. Last week, it was in the paper that he's being investigated for fraud. So much for the life of luxury she dreamed of." I stood there, my hand trembling, leaving a fish in the basket of the next stall, even though I had no intention of buying it. Their words were like hammer blows to my head. The image of Chloe leaving my house with her head held high, with her arrogant gesture and her promise of a better opportunity, contrasted completely with what I had just heard. She had traded David's happiness, his entire family, for an empty dream. And now she was paying the price. Sharon took my hand and nodded with the look that said it all. Life settles its debts, Marguerite. She thought she was so smart, but in the end, she only earned her own misfortune. On the way home, I walked slower than usual. The words from the market kept echoing in my head. I didn't feel happy, not out of malice, but because I knew that no matter how low Chloe fell, it wouldn't erase David's pain. I thought about my son, about how he sat in silence every night, not talking about his work, not whistling like before. Every time I saw him, I felt my heart ache. I had protected him from Chloe's plans, but I couldn't protect him from the wound he carried inside. That night, I made a simple dinner: rice, beans from the pot, and a little chicken. David came home and, like every day, took off his shoes in silence and hung up his coat. He looked at me, trying to force a smile. "Mom, I'm really tired today. After dinner, I'm going to bed." I nodded, but inside, I felt a knot. I wanted to tell him what I had heard at the market, to tell him that Chloe didn't deserve his pain. But I held back. He had suffered enough. I didn't want to rub salt in the wound. I just said, "Of course, son. Eat. I made the beans you like." I got up and went out to the patio. The night sky was full of stars, but I didn't feel at peace. A part of me felt a small comfort. Justice had come for her, even if I wasn't the one to execute it. But that comfort quickly vanished when I thought of David. I knew that no matter how much Chloe failed, it wouldn't give my son back the years of happiness he deserved. I went back inside, sat down and hugged my glass of cold water. I promised myself I wouldn't tell David anything about those rumors. He needed time to heal, to find himself. I looked at the family photo hanging on the wall, where David was a little boy holding my hand,
with a radiant smile. I whispered as if to myself, "Son, I'll be here waiting for the day you smile again. No matter how long it takes, I'll wait." Time passed slowly but steadily. Like raindrops soaking dry earth, my house, which had been filled with a painful silence since Chloe's departure, slowly regained some of its warmth. David, my son, began to recover, albeit in small steps. He was no longer the withdrawn young man of the first few days. He no longer stared into space in the living room. He focused on his work, staying up late, preparing reports, taking care of every detail.
I heard his colleagues call, praising his dedication and honesty, and I felt my soul lighten a bit. But I was still worried, fearing that the wound in his heart was still there, deep and latent, even if he hid it with forced smiles. One afternoon, as I was knitting on the patio, I heard the iron gate creak. I looked up and saw David walk in, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him walked a petite young woman with a simple blue dress and her hair pulled back. She smiled with bright, sincere eyes, and in her hands she carried a basket of fruit. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Thompson," she said in a soft voice. "I'm Leah Delgado. I'm an elementary school teacher. David has told me a lot about you." I stood up, a little surprised, but her smile gave me a strange warmth. "Hello, dear," I replied, accepting the basket. "Come in, sit down. I'll make you some fresh lemonade." Dinner that night was special, with a warmth we hadn't felt in a long time. I made the chicken and dumplings that David loves so much, with some biscuits and a bit of salad. Leah sat next to him, talking naturally, asking me how I prepared the dish, and then turning to David. "Are you enjoying it, David? I just love your mom's cooking." David smiled, a genuine smile, effortless, without any shadows. "It's delicious, Leah," he replied, and his eyes sparkled like they used to. I looked at my son, saw that smile, and felt my heart fill with warmth. It had been so long since I had seen him smile like that, without that darkness that weighed down his gaze. Leah was attentive to every detail. When my water was empty, she quietly got up to pour me more. And then she put more lettuce on my plate. "Have some more, Mom. The vegetables are very fresh." She wasn't showing off or trying to impress, but every one of her gestures showed a pure sincerity. After dinner, while I was clearing the plates, Leah rolled up her sleeves and stood beside me at the sink. "Let me help you, Mom," she said with a smile. I looked at her and saw a world of difference from Chloe. No luxurious dresses, no sweet and fake words, just a simple, good-hearted young woman. In the following days, Leah visited frequently. She would accompany me to the market, choosing vegetables with me, laughing when I told her stories from my years in the neighborhood. Once, she helped David organize some work papers, sitting beside him at the kitchen table, patiently reading each page. "You should pay more attention to this part," she said, pointing to a figure, her voice soft but confident. David nodded, looking at her with gratitude. I, from a corner, pretended to chop onions, but inside I felt a great joy. I realized that Leah truly loved David, not for his money or his position, but for who he was, the hard-working, honest man I had raised. One afternoon, I sat on the patio to watch the sunset paint the street orange. The wind blew gently, ruffling my gray hair. I sighed, not of sadness, but of a peace I rarely felt. I thought about everything we had been through: Chloe's betrayal, David's tears, the sleepless nights spent trying to protect my son. But I also thought about the truth, about the justice that had arrived, albeit late, and about the hope that was now blooming. Leah, with her sincere smile and noble heart, was like a ray of light in the darkness we had crossed. I murmured as if to myself, "Betrayal can destroy a family, but truth and integrity always make way for a new dawn." And sometimes those who leave for ambition find themselves alone with their own shame. I thought of Chloe, of the rumors at the market, of how she had traded everything for an empty dream. But I no longer felt rage.
She had chosen her path, and I chose to stay by David's side, helping him rebuild his life. I looked toward the street and saw David and Leah walking back, hand in hand, talking animatedly. David turned to look at me and waved. "Mom, Leah and I are going to make an apple pie for you today." I smiled and nodded. "Of course, son. I'll be waiting for you here." For the first time in many months, I felt a true relief. The storm had passed, and although the scars remained, I knew that my son and I had found a new page, a brighter one, full of hope.